Hi, everyone. Welcome to another amazing topic of conversation. I want to thank my sponsors, South Florida PBS, and their immersed exhibit, DaVinci. So please go. It's really amazing and very educational. If you need an office space, whether if it's a virtual office for 1 hour or a month, Alexa's Workspaces can make it happen. And if you want your online shopping boutique, Hermosa Mujer will be able to do it while helping women-owned businesses. So, Deborah, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Tariffs. For the normal people, I know that this is your day-to-day, that this is what you do. This is your everyday wording, but for the normal people that do not understand what's going on with tariffs, can you please explain it?
Sure. And thank you again for having me. This is an incredibly hot time for tariffs, and there's a lot of confusion. And even for folks like myself that work in tariffs every day, there's still a lot of confusion. Um, but tariffs are assessed on foreign goods that are imported into the United States. Whether you call them tariffs, whether you call them duties, it's all the same thing. There are established tariff rates or duty rates for all different kinds of products based on how they're classified in the tariff. So a computer has a particular tariff code, uh, you know, a horse has a particular tariff code, anything that comes in the country.
Correct.
Those set rates are originally bound through international agreements as well as acts of Congress. Um, but there are different ways to modify the tariff rate that applies to a product coming into the country, and it may be through a free trade agreement or some other program that allows for a lower rate. There's also punitive tariffs that are assessed from time to time that impose higher rates. And this is nothing new. This is all very normal. But it's about how we get there. And as you may recall, in the first Trump administration, there were a number of new tariffs that were imposed through particular legal channels. The most common one that everybody may be familiar with are the China tariffs. Those were implemented under a particular statute. There's also the steel and aluminum tariffs that were implemented in a different statute. This time, the president 2.0, Trump 2.0, is imposing additional tariffs, punitive tariffs, on products using his Emergency Powers Act authority. There's a statute called the IEPA, and it basically gives the president very broad range to impose measures to redress areas of national security and emergency concerns. And so what the president has done has said that the opioid and fentanyl crisis and the immigration crisis are national emergencies. And in order to redress those emergencies, the president is imposing tariffs by executive order. Now, there are actually a few of these that are coming through presidential proclamation. Whether and when he uses executive order, presidential proclamation, quite frankly, we don't know why or why he's using different measures. But ultimately, it's the same thing. He's imposing tariffs on additional tariffs on products from China, in addition to what was already there. He's imposing tariffs on more tariffs on steel and aluminum. He is removing any ability to get exceptions to those tariffs. And they're coming in rapid fire. So over the last 2 weeks, you've seen in the news, okay, we're going to impose tariffs on Mexico. We're going to impose tariffs on Canada. And then they were actually suspended. But he did move forward with
But
tariffs
not suspended because they're going into effect on March 4th.
March 1st actually was the extension, and it remains to be seen what will actually happen. But you're right, they were suspended until March 1st.
But
Um,
isn't this like the trade deal of the Americas that was done with Mexico and Canada, that there were no tariffs, right? Isn't this like breaking the deal
so
in
you
simpler
would think
terms
you would think so, right? Not only that, but it was a deal that he
that
renegotiated
he
to better
made?
terms for the United States, right? We had NAFTA, now we have the U.S. Mexico Canada Free Trade Agreement. A common misconception, though, about those free trade agreements is that they do not automatically apply to anything coming in. Um, and so products have to actually qualify under those agreements first. But there are exceptions in these agreements that allow for a country to take unilateral action in cases of emergencies.
So, okay, so that, according to what I understand, according to what I understand, the tariffs that are being imposed, Trump wants to get some additional income for the US by imposing tariffs, right?
Here's so.
But in reality, all those tariffs are being imposed to the end consumer.
That is correct.
It is not that the government of Canada is going to bring to a checkbook and pay the government of the US.
That's absolutely correct. Part of the imposition of the tariffs is not just a revenue generating function, but it's a measure that Trump is using to impose his will, impose change from those countries. And that's something that we saw when he temporarily suspended the duties on Mexico and later that day on Canada was he got some agreements, some terms from the respective leaders of those countries that satisfied him temporarily to say, okay, we're going to hold off on the tariffs. So that wasn't about revenue generation as much as it was about getting those countries to act a certain way. Similarly, even prior to the imposition of the Mexico and Canada executive orders, you may have seen that he threatened tariffs on Colombia because Colombia was turning away planes of deportees.
Of immigrants, yeah.
And we had a laugh here at the firm. Somebody said, "Okay, who had bingo? Who had Colombia on their bingo card for the first country to get tariffs imposed?" And nobody did. Nobody expected that. And of course, that was resolved quickly, and the duties were never imposed. So it's not just about revenue generation. It's about a number of things. Trump has always been interested in why everybody has equal access to the US market, but there are a number of tariff barriers into those markets. And so we're seeing threats of reciprocal tariffs that may very well be coming out in the next few days on countries and regions that have not previously been prime targets.
But on Trump 1.0, when the tariffs were imposed to China and they didn't buy a lot of the agriculture, especially the soybeans.
Mhm.
And eventually they were almost broke and they had to give them like a subsidy so they would continue. So it didn't help the country. Those tariffs didn't help because China was not buying from the US. So that's the part that I really don't understand. I understand closing the border, I understand the fentanyl thing. Another thing, we need to educate the whole US population on drug abuse so that it doesn't be consumed here.
Right. Yeah. Tariffs aren't going to change
No.
behavior. No, and it's interesting too, because the additional tariffs that have been imposed on China now, 10% across the board. So even products that didn't previously have China tariffs on them now do. When China responded, imposing tariffs on certain US goods, interestingly enough, soybeans was not a part of that. So it's very interesting what's different today than what was during the first administration. And the reasons are varied.
Yeah. So from your point, from imports, exports, how do you manage all this? Like
Well,
one day it is, one day it's not. I can't imagine the logistics of all the manufacturers and aluminum suppliers.
and there's so many unknowns as well. We're waiting right now for Federal Register notices to explain to us what is meant by derivative products of steel and aluminum. We don't know whether it means the same types of derivative products, because it's not just raw material steel and raw material aluminum, but it's products
So it's a
containing,
different,
products
so
containing steel and
each
aluminum.
one has a different one?
Well, there's so the tariffs that have been implemented through executive order this week impose 25% additional tariffs on steel and aluminum. They've eliminated the exclusion process for people to get exceptions for their goods, and they've eliminated any exclusions for any of the countries that previously didn't have those tariffs imposed on their steel and aluminum. And they've added a couple of different things to these new orders, one of which is that duties will be imposed on derivative products yet to be defined by a Federal Register notice. The reason that's interesting is because there were, in the original steel and aluminum tariffs, there were specific derivatives that were included, rivets and things like that, but still all steel or aluminum. These notices suggest that this is going to be broader. This derivative products is going to be broader than other, just barely more than raw materials. And so we don't know, this could affect automotive parts. This could affect, the aluminum component of a doggy door. We don't know yet because that notice hasn't been issued. So, in addition to this fast and furious implementation of additional tariffs, we have a lack of clarity. We have things yet to be defined. And so how do companies prepare? We're looking in the crystal ball. We're running, various scenarios. What if it's this? What if it's that? And in some cases, we just have to sit and wait for the definitions to come out.
Will this help the US in any way?
Depends on how you define help.
Well, because I see that it became, and according to every single economist that I have been reading in the past week, every single economist and every single scenario, as you put it, without having the crystal ball, all of them put it that no one wins the tariff war. No one.
Right.
It can totally generate a standstill.
Right. And so again, I go back to how are we defining winning, right? To use the president's own term, he's winning. He's doing what he said he was going to do. He's disrupting a whole lot of things. He's keeping campaign promises. And I'm not 100% sure he necessarily believes that these things are going to
Work.
help, but they are fulfilling campaign promises for whatever that's worth.
So it's bottom line, it's wait and see.
It is. There's certainly some actions that are being taken that have some merit to their goals. But much like the dismantling of USAID practically overnight, it's not so much the what, it's the how that's the problem. Granted, the what is also a problem. But there's due process, there are procedures, there's statutes, there's regulations that are supposed to be followed, and in some cases there's not. And just yesterday the president sat in the Oval Office with Mr. Musk next to him, questioning why judges would be questioning his actions. Well, because again, it's not so much about the what as the how.
But also, if some things were approved by Congress, doesn't this become like illegal in certain cases?
So this is where, of course, the checks and balances, the separation of powers of government, secured from a court case from 200 years ago that the vice president seemed to misquote. Yes, Congress is a check and balance. The judiciary is a check and balance. But I think that the administration at this point doesn't necessarily care if a court says what you're doing is wrong, because he's going to fight back. And by the time the courts are able to do anything, what's done has already been done. Chaos has already been,
Correct.
created, and then it's about coming in and being the hero and fixing it.
How do, for example, your clients at this point, do they keep on selling? Do they put a stop on it? Like, I know it's a balance game, but for a company that has huge labor, logistics, and the whole from A to Z, how do they plan for a 2025 year with something like this?
So, it depends on the industry and the products at issue. But each company, if they're getting good advice, they have options in their wheelhouse to consider to mitigate the impact of the tariffs. But even with those mitigation efforts, the tariffs aren't going away. And so they have to then make accommodations. And in some cases, they're negotiating with their suppliers for better prices to account for it. In some cases, they're just going to have to raise the cost of their end product.
So we still have no answers. It's a wait and see.
It is, because the landscape is rapidly changing. I think that the one thing that we can expect is that the chaos will continue. There will be a number of additional orders, executive orders coming out. And at some point, things will settle down. And whether that means that they're going to settle down with very high tariffs being the new normal, or whether some of the things get rescinded or retracted or struck down by the courts, that all remains to be seen.
Still, the waiting game. So
yes.
To be continued.
No, it is, but there are things that companies can do. Of course, get educated about what's happening, about what their options are. Whether any of the options to mitigate the tariffs are appropriate for their business. Can they restructure to benefit from what we call first sale valuation, taking a lower, implementing a structure that allows them to take the sale price from a prior transaction before the goods arrive in the United States. Whether they can use a foreign trade zone, which doesn't eliminate the tariffs, but it basically delays having to actually pay the tariffs until the products are taken out of the foreign trade zone, or if they're just brought in and then re-exported using a bonded warehouse or foreign trade zone, so that they don't get the tariff. The tariffs aren't imposed at all. Again, different measures. Can they source from other countries that maybe still have some preferential? Can they move manufacturing to the United States? None of these things can happen overnight. They all take a little time to implement. But these are the things we're considering. I spoke with a company today that's looking to essentially move a plant from Europe to the United States to start producing here. They're still going to have to bring in the machinery. that's going to, potentially be subject to additional tariffs. They're still going to have to find sources for their raw materials. The U.S. capacity to provide those raw materials and components is going to slowly build up over time for things that it can, and it's not for the things that it can't. And again, we're going to see a new normal.
There's always going to be those certain parts that need to be imported regardless.
Right. Exactly.
Deb, thank you so much. I know that this is a conversation to be continued.
Absolutely. We will definitely see a number of developments, and happy to answer questions anytime.
Thank you, and to everyone, until next week, and hope that everyone stays safe and there will be peace. Have a great day.